Have you ever walked into a place only to feel every pair of eyes telling you, you don't belong here? Not because you said something wrong, not because you did something wrong, but simply because of your face, your skin, or the way you dress. Something they've already decided they don't like. It's not just in the coldness of their voice. It's in the way they position themselves in front of you as if guarding a world you're not allowed to touch. That afternoon, the grand lobby of the Sterling Crown gleamed under hundreds of crystal chandeliers. Guests in tuxedos and evening gowns crossed the marble floor, the click of high heels punctuating a story of power and privilege. And in the midst of all that glitter stood a black woman clutching a leather folio, silent, as if asking herself, how many more times will I have to go through this? But this isn't just a story about exclusion. It's a story about a promise that one day you will walk into any room, and instead of finding reasons to push you out, they'll find reasons to keep you there. A promise that your presence will never again be something you have to justify. Her name was Malia Grant. And in the moment when everyone thought she was about to be escorted out by security through the service exit, she glanced at her watch, smiled faintly, and said just one thing. 10 more minutes. No one knew what it meant. Some chuckled under their breath. Others shook their heads in pity. But 10 minutes later, those cheering for standards would watch those very standards crumble before their eyes. And the room they thought they were protecting in the name of class would bow to the very woman they just tried to cast out. If you believe stories of quiet strength and flipped justice deserve to be told more often, hit that like button, share this with anyone who's faced injustice, and subscribe. Don't forget to turn on notifications because you won't want to miss the moment when truth finally speaks. And now, let's go back to the very first moment, when Malia stepped through the doors of the Sterling Crown and everything began. That morning, the city lay under a thin veil of mist, but inside the Sterling Crown, everything gleamed so brightly it felt as though light had been distilled for this place alone. The grand lobby opened onto a polished marble floor, each step echoing softly while crystal chandeliers hung high above, pouring gold light down on every face. To scrutinize, to decide who was worthy of being here? Malia Grant stepped inside, the pointed heels of her black shoes tapping out a light but steady rhythm, each note carrying across the vast space. She held her leather folio close, her shoulders a touch straighter than usual, the kind of stance that told the discerning eye she was no stranger to important rooms. But here, that confidence seemed invisible. Eyes scanned her as if reading an unseen dossier. Her skin tone, her hair, the way her scarf was knotted, all weighed and measured without a word. From behind the reception desk, Claudia Benson emerged, her stilettos clicking with a sharper, shorter sound, like a period closing a sentence. Her gaze swept from Malia's head to her feet, pausing just long enough on the neatly bound curls, then sliding to the shoes and the folio. It wasn't the look of someone welcoming a guest. It was the look of someone searching for evidence to exclude. "Who are you here to see?" The words were polite enough, but the tone was laced with control, as if Claudia were really saying, "You don't belong here." Malia met her eyes without haste. A small silence settled between the click of a nearby keyboard and the hiss of an espresso machine in the corner. She knew this feeling well. That moment when someone tries to slot you neatly into the box they've prepared. "I have an appointment," she replied, her voice low and clear, as if stating a fact beyond question. Claudia tilted her head slightly, a smile flashing for a moment but never reaching her eyes before vanishing. "We have very clear policies for guests with appointments. Let me check if your name is actually on the list." The word actually was light but sharp, a discreet needle meant to sting. Across the room, a few guests glanced over. A man in a gray suit leaned subtly, coffee cup in hand, angling to catch more of the exchange. In the Sterling Crown, the most interesting stories weren't always printed on the invitations. Sometimes they happened right at the front desk. Malia didn't smile, but her gaze stayed even. It unsettled Claudia, who had clearly expected a different reaction. Embarrassment, protest, perhaps even an awkward laugh. Instead, all she got was silence. Because some silences aren't meant to make space for an answer. They're meant to see who loses patience first. And this time, Claudia wouldn't have to wait long to find out. The murmur of conversation in the lobby began to fade, as if someone had turned down the volume. Several guests, most of them white, fully turned to watch, their eyes bright with a mix of curiosity and anticipation. Phones began to appear. No one needed to say, "Don't film." In a place like the Sterling Crown, an unscripted scene was rare, free entertainment. A woman in a fur coat by the staircase angled her phone discreetly, though the glow of the screen lit the ceiling above her. Near the glass doors, a man pretended to adjust his tie while his camera pointed squarely at Malia. Every lens was a second pair of eyes, like not just observing, but capturing every detail for stories yet to be spun. Malia tightened her grip on the folio, her fingers curling slightly, though her face remained unreadable. She looked like someone listening to her own heartbeat. Not to measure fear, but to keep time for her patience. Claudia stood tall behind the desk and reached for the radio clipped to her hip. Her voice carried clearly enough for everyone nearby to hear. "Escort her out through the service entrance, now!" The word service entrance dropped into the room like a decree. At the Sterling Crown, that door was for things to be removed quickly and quietly. Trash, deliveries, and people deemed unsuitable. A soft click came from the corner where a security guard straightened his posture. Malia glanced over and caught his eye. Not hostile, but the look of someone accustomed to following orders first, asking why later. The air in the room shifted into something unnamed. Part tension, part anticipation. Everyone here was waiting for one moment, the moment the outsider would be removed so order and standards could be restored. But Malia didn't move. She stood tall, folio pressed to her chest. From where she was, she could see her reflection in the glass behind the desk. Plain, unshowy, but a reminder to herself that she knew exactly who she was. Outside, a car horn echoed faintly. Inside, the radio crackled again, and the guard began to move. A few phones lifted higher, ready to capture the decisive moment. But if they thought this would be just another video of someone being escorted out, they were about to be wrong. And this time, the ending to their free show wouldn't match the script they had in mind. Footsteps sounded against the marble. Measured, deliberate. Two security guards emerged from a side hallway, black uniforms crisp, name tags gleaming. They didn't rush or act aggressively. Instead, one stepped aside, opening just enough space to invite Malia forward toward the service entrance. The whole lobby seemed to hold its breath. Phones stayed trained on her. The woman in the fur coat tilted her head, finger poised on the record button. A man near the door leaned against the wood counter for a better view. Malia stayed still. She slowly looked up at the guard, meeting his eyes without flinching. A thin smile curved her lips, not reaching her eyes. The kind of smile that could be either courtesy or challenge. 10 more minutes, she said, her voice just loud enough to carry through the lobby. And everything will be clear. The words fell into the space like a stone into still water. Ripples spread, not in water, but in glances and whispers. Some furrowed brows. No one knew if it was a threat, a promise, or just wishful thinking. Behind the desk, Claudia's smile tilted with a hint of mockery. "I don't think we need to wait 10 minutes, she said, but her hand stayed on the radio. In her mind, the script was set. The unworthy would disappear down the back hall, as always. But somewhere in the room, a few eyes had changed. Not all, just a few. People sharp enough to notice that Malia didn't look cornered. Her calm wasn't that of someone clinging to a fragile hope. It was that of someone waiting for a moment she had chosen herself. The guard's stance loosened slightly. His eyes wavered as though silently asking, "What do you know that we don't?" Malia's phone buzzed in her pocket. She didn't reach for it. She didn't even glance down. She kept that thin smile as if measuring the seconds until she would pull back the curtain on something only she knew. And in the grand lobby of the Sterling Crown, where every eye had once agreed on the script, something new began to take root. Curiosity. And once curiosity takes hold, it has a way of outgrowing arrogance. 10 minutes can pass quickly or slowly, depending on what you're waiting for. And here, no one yet knew what they were about to wait for, until it was far too late. Near the far end of the lobby, just by the entrance to the lounge, Lena Cho, a young Asian woman, stood holding a steaming cappuccino. She had been watching the whole time, her eyes following every movement between Claudia and Malia. The moment she saw security approach, Lena set her cup down on a side table, pulled her phone from her handbag, and within a few quick taps, her screen was streaming live. A caption appeared almost instantly. Manager confronts black woman for no reason. No question mark, no added explanation. Just a statement, leaving viewers to imagine the rest. In the first seconds, the view count barely touched double digits. A comment popped up. Racist incident, call the news. Almost immediately after another, probably a scam for attention. Two opposing takes, but together they created a strange magnetism because nothing draws an audience faster than a situation they can argue over. The numbers began to climb, 20, 30, 50. Comments started rolling in, flickering across the screen like the drumbeat of a street performer's snare. Each viewer wanted to leave their mark. A verdict, a prediction, a call to action. At the reception desk, Claudia remained upright, her spine perfectly straight, as if ready for any lens to capture her. Malia stayed rooted where she was, eyes sweeping the lobby until they caught the reflected glow of Lena's phone screen. For a fraction of a second, something passed across Malia's face. Not embarrassment, not anger, but the kind of focus that measures time in seconds. Views are climbing fast, a young man near Lena remarked, loud enough for a few others to hear. A woman in a red coat leaned over and asked, "What are you filming?" Lena didn't answer right away. She kept the camera steady and murmured, "Watch and decide for yourself." Each new viewer was like a knock on the door of the room Claudia and Malia occupied. And those outside that room, the online audience, might have began choosing sides. Some were convinced it was blatant racial discrimination. Others scoffed, certain it was staged for attention. But regardless of who was right or wrong, one fact was already clear. Control of the narrative had slipped from the people inside the lobby. It was now being rewritten in real time. One comment at a time, by strangers sitting half a city or half a world away. And once you lose control of the story, the question isn't who's right anymore. It's how will this be told? Only one person in that lobby already knew the answer, and she wasn't holding a phone. Malia leaned slightly toward the desk, her voice low and even, as if inquiring about a routine matter. "I'd like you to recheck my appointment." Claudia didn't need more than a second's glance at the monitor. She waved her hand in the air. The same casual dismissal as shutting a door in someone's face. "Not in the system," she said, without bothering to look up. An honest bystander, if there had been one, might have added, "At Sterling Crown, the computer doesn't just store data. It stores bias. And when the system doesn't recognize you, it means you don't exist." A faint humph came from behind. A man in a teal golf shirt, collar stiff, nodded approvingly. "Standards are standards," he declared, as if pronouncing a truth. Malia turned, letting her gaze sweep the crowd until it paused briefly on him. She didn't respond, didn't change expression, but in her silence a few people felt as if they'd just missed a perfectly sharp retort. Claudia tapped a few keys, not to search, but to make the sound of procedure being followed. She tilted her head, voice slowing into the tone used for explaining to a child. "We have policies to ensure order. No name in the system means no appointment." From her corner, Lena shifted the camera from Claudia's face to Malia's. The livestream audience could now see the contrast clearly. One face framed by a thin smile and an air of authority, the other calm, unreadable. The comments poured in. "Racist. Just doing her job, nothing wrong here. Look at her, too confident." The Sterling Crown lobby now felt like two worlds layered atop each other. One existed in spoken words, rules, and standards, Claudia's domain. The other unfolded through glances, raised phones, and verdicts delivered from thousands of miles away. Malia stayed motionless, hands wrapped firmly around her folio. She knew every move, however small, would be captured and labeled. Instead of reacting, she let silence do the work. But what no one realized was that silence isn't always acceptance. Sometimes it's the pause before a response strong enough to flip the entire story. And that pause was almost over. In the middle of Claudia's lecture about procedures and standards, a small sound broke through. A single vibration from inside Malia's coat pocket. Her phone lit up, the glow reflecting off the polished reception desk. For just an instant, a few nearby caught the words on the screen. Legal team, boardroom ready. No emojis, no extra text. A short, precise message that anyone in the world of power and negotiation would recognize. This wasn't lunch plans. Malia glanced down, held the screen in her sight for exactly 1 second, then locked it. The light vanished, leaving only the reflection of her composed face. No explanation. No signal she intended to share what she'd just received. A young woman standing near Lena nudged her. Did you see that? She got some kind of message. Lena didn't answer, but her camera zoomed in tighter on Malia. On Lena's screen, the viewer count jumped. 150, 200, then 300. In seconds, it doubled again. Comments raced by too fast to read. Is she waiting for her lawyer? Boardroom, who is she? Definitely staged. The hashtag Sterling bias began appearing here and there. At first it was a trickle, but each minute more users tagged it when sharing the stream. People who'd never set foot in Sterling Crown were now part of the story. Witnesses or judges in a public trial on social media. Claudia seemed oblivious to the rising wave. She still looked at Malia like someone holding absolute authority, her hand resting on her radio as if it were a badge. But from another perspective, control had already slipped, flowing into hundreds, soon thousands, of watching eyes. Malia said nothing. She simply shifted her folio to her other hand, then stilled again. The movement was small, but it felt like someone adjusting the position of a chess piece, a subtle signal that the next move was hers. In the lobby, some believed the story was nearing its end. Others, especially the sharper online viewers, were beginning to suspect this was only the opening act. And once the audience begins to suspect, that's when every familiar script is ready to be broken. Only one question remained. Who in this room would be the most surprised when it happened? The click of polished shoes echoed across the marble floor like a measured drumbeat. The glass doors at the end of the hallway parted, and Philip Rourke appeared. He didn't simply enter, he advanced as if the entire marble lobby were his personal stage, with the guests, staff, and even Malia as mere supporting actors in a play he had long since mastered. The navy suit was perfectly tailored, the tie knotted with precision, the slicked-back hair without a single strand astray. Philip carried the air of someone accustomed to being heard the moment he opened his mouth. His gaze swept the lobby, registering every face, pausing just a heartbeat longer on Malia, a look both appraising and measuring as though pricing an object. "We maintain standards," he said, voice deep and resonant, "by protecting this space from misunderstandings." The word misunderstandings was softened, wrapped in velvet, pleasant enough to disguise the trap within, but tight enough that everyone knew what he meant. A few faint chuckles rippled through the crowd. Claudia, behind the reception desk, let the corner of her mouth lift, her eyes lighting up as though she had just found the most powerful ally in the room. Lena Cho, camera still steady, subtly adjusted her angle to capture the man claiming the room. On her phone screen, comments flooded in. Is he the boss? You can tell what kind of guy he is by the voice. It's about to get tense. Malia didn't move. She stood as though Philip's words had been nothing more than a passing breeze, not enough to make her shift her weight. Slowly, her eyes dropped to her left wrist, where a slim watch caught the chandelier's light. 7 minutes, she said. No emphasis, no explanation. Her tone was calm, matter of fact, as if it were the only information the room needed. Philip's eyes narrowed, a flicker too subtle for most to catch. He stepped forward, each shoe hitting the marble with a crisp note. "I think we'll resolve this sooner than that," he replied, his gaze locked on hers. But Malia's words had planted something he hadn't noticed. A question in the room. 7 minutes. Was it a warning, a promise, or just a delusion? The ambiguity crept into the minds of a few onlookers, making them hesitate before stopping their recordings, afraid they might miss what could happen before time was up. In Sterling Crown's lobby, power had always been defined by ceremony and the weight of a stare, but now it was being tested by something else. A stillness that needed no noise. And with each second ticking by, 7 minutes felt more worth waiting for. Philip pivoted deliberately, ensuring no one in the lobby missed his presentation. His voice was steady, each word released with the polish of someone who had rehearsed before a mirror countless times. Sterling Crown, he declared, was built on a foundation of standards, and standards are not negotiable. We welcome everyone, but we also have a duty to protect this level of quality from any disruption. The words rolled out like an old script passed down through generations of managers, just with a new name in the target role. Each sentence wore the veneer of responsibility, but underneath was a quieter message. Here, those who don't fit will be reshaped until they do. From her corner, Lena kept the phone at eye level. The live stream had now hit 20,000 viewers. Comments scrolled nonstop. He thinks he's a judge. Look at him, pure command posture. Club speech for the privileged. And on the other side, he's right. Rules are rules. The hashtag Sterling Bias climbed the local trending list. What began as a trickle became a steady current, spilling into community groups, forums, and personal feeds. Some shared it with captions like, "This is why I avoid places like this," while others added, "This is how you keep standards high." None of this seemed to reach Rourke. He kept talking, turning, scanning the room for approval. A few guests nodded along. Others crossed their arms, their expressions caught between curiosity and anticipation of how this handling would end. Malia stayed rooted where she had been since entering. Her eyes didn't leave Rourke. Not in defiance, but with the gaze of someone watching another perform a role they knew by heart. No one could guess what she was thinking, but her stillness began to gnaw at the patience of a few in the crowd. Rourke closed with a final line, like sealing a decree. "Standards are the foundation of respect, and we will never abandon that." He paused, letting silence hang like a well-timed rest in a score. But sometimes, silence isn't for applause. It's for someone else to step in and rewrite the next movement. And in Sterling Crown's lobby, one person was ready to do just that. With a slow nod, Rourke signaled the end of his address. He turned to the security guard, a wordless exchange in the space of a breath. Then, deliberately loud enough for those nearby to hear, he said, "Call it in." A curt blink served as explanation. The guard lifted his radio, pressing the button. The sharp crackle broke the tension like the first raindrop before a storm. A male voice on the other end responded, cold and detached as if it were just another item on a checklist. "Copy. Nearest patrol is en route." Some guests exchanged approving glances, small nods confirming the right thing was being done. In another corner, Lena's phone buzzed again. Viewers still climbing, comments flying. Cops are really coming? She didn't do anything. This is about to get good. Malia didn't turn toward the guard or the door where people began picturing Navy uniforms arriving. She kept her gaze fixed on Rourke. Then her voice cut through, not loud but steady, impossible to ignore. 7 minutes. Just 4 words, piercing the air that had leaned heavily to one side. A man near the door frowned, asking his neighbor, 7 minutes for what? The other shrugged, eyes still locked on her. Rourke let out a dry, paper-thin chuckle. "I'm afraid the police will arrive sooner than that," he said, with the confidence of a man convinced of the outcome. But even as he spoke, he couldn't fully shake the discomfort her calm created. Somewhere in the crowd, a young man whispered, If it were me, I'd have left already. What's she waiting for? His friend replied, "Don't know, but I want to see it." In one sentence, Malia had done what Rourke's entire speech hadn't. She had made people wait. Wait to see what those 7 minutes held. Wait to find out whether they would end in victory or defeat. And the truth was, once a crowd starts waiting, they rarely look away. Malia knew that, and she also knew the next move was hers. The wail of sirens bled into the lobby. Faint at first, threading through the thick glass, but enough for everyone in Sterling Crown to sense what was drawing near. It came in measured bursts, each one layered over the hum of an engine, pausing briefly as if to inhale before returning louder, clearer. The crowd shifted. The polite restraint of earlier conversations gave way to open murmurs. Questions floated across the space, hushed commentary laced with sighs. Some looked on with the gleam of spectators awaiting the climax of a free performance. Others wore solemn expressions as though watching order being restored was some civic duty. Claudia straightened, gripping her radio like a prop. Her voice carried the careful cadence of someone aware of the camera. "We have a responsibility to protect our guests and the image of Sterling Crown," she said, every syllable chosen as though it were destined for the evening news. Beside her, Philip Rourke lowered his voice into something theatrically grave. "We welcome all," he said, "but we cannot allow our standards to be compromised. This isn't just a hotel, it's a symbol." His gaze swept the room to make sure each person received the message. They stood there like co-hosts on an episode of Luxury Under Siege, heroic managers guarding a glittering fortress against an intruder. Only here the so-called intruder hadn't moved an inch. The sirens grew sharper. A few guests drifted toward the doors for a better look. "Are they really calling the police for this?" a woman in a red dress whispered. No answer was needed. The sound outside was proof enough. Lena Cho, still live streaming, dipped her phone briefly to adjust the frame, then lifted it again, catching Claudia and Rourke in a perfect side-by-side shot. The viewer count climbed. Comments skewered the gap between the grand words being spoken and the image of a black woman standing still, offering no resistance. Malia hadn't moved. Her gaze stayed locked on Rourke, ignoring the noise swelling around her. That stillness, set against the surrounding clamor, became the hook no one could look away from. Outside, the sirens were close now. Inside, the stage felt set for a handling in front of both the gathered crowd and thousands watching online. But sometimes, when a stage is perfectly set, the lead actor refuses to follow the script. And in that instant, the entire production shifts. Rourke turned fully toward her, lowering his voice enough to be intimate yet loud enough for half the room to hear. "You want me to believe you have an appointment here? Do you really think that changes our decision?" Malia lifted her eyes, offering only a slow, deliberate nod. No defense, no counterattack, no trace of irritation. Just a movement so small and unyielding it was both answer and refusal. The lobby seemed to pause. The crowd, primed for a sharp retort or a barbed smile, got only silence. And silence, as it turns out, can be the most dangerous soundtrack of all. It magnifies everything else. The click of a guard's shoe, the drip of coffee at the bar, the whisper of breath from the onlookers. Rourke's gaze searched her face for a crack, a flicker of doubt or unease. He found none. Her composure reflected his own impatience back at him. Behind the desk, Claudia leaned toward him. "She's stalling. We should end this now." Rourke nodded but didn't step forward. Against his own intent, he found himself caught in the very pause he wanted to break. Across the room, Lena framed Malia's face in a tight shot. Comments poured in. "She's too calm. How is she still standing there? Feels like she knows something." The viewer count spiked. Each remark tossed more fuel onto the quiet fire of curiosity. One guard shifted his weight, glancing at Rourke as if to ask silently, "What next?" But what next no longer belonged to them. Malia had turned the crowd from passive witnesses into active waiters, each imagining their own dramatic outcome. The sirens outside swelled again, Inside, unanswered questions multiplied. Someone would have to break the silence, but when it happened, it might not be who they expected. Rourke looked ready to close the scene when Malia leaned forward, just enough to slice into his prepared lines. "In 15 years of managing this place," she asked, voice even and unhurried, "have you ever been sued for discrimination?" The words hit the air like a stone into still water. No one had expected it, least of all from someone who'd been motionless until now. Rourke blinked, a quick flicker that betrayed more than he wanted. The mood shifted. In the corner, Lena swung her camera toward Malia. Comments exploded. What did she just say? He did not see that coming. Twist incoming. The viewer count surged. The hashtag Sterling bias doubled in seconds. Rourke's smile was thin and dry. "I don't think that's any of your concern," he said, clinging to the tone of authority. But the question had already seeded doubt, in the lobby and across thousands of screens. "She didn't answer," murmured the woman in red. Her companion nodded, eyes on Malia. The tension shifted again, no longer about removal, but about revelation. Malia didn't press, didn't repeat the question. She tilted her head slightly as though she'd learned what she needed from his reaction. Then she checked her watch. 2 minutes, she said. A man frowned. 2 minutes for what? Malia stepped toward the reception desk. The crowd parted, eager for a better view. Phones tracked her every move. Behind her, Rourke's eyes followed, a trace of unease cutting through his composure. He assumed her countdown would end with police arriving, but to her, those 2 minutes clearly meant something else. And as the silent countdown began in every mind in the room, no one realized they were stepping into the exact moment when everything was about to turn. The sound of Malia's heels on the marble was steady, neither hurried nor hesitant, like a metronome dictating the room's pulse. When she stopped at the reception desk, the crowd instinctively eased back half a step, forming a natural arc around her. She placed her briefcase on the walnut counter. The movement wasn't rushed, but there was a precision to it that made conversations falter. The metallic clasp clicked open, a crisp tack that felt like the cue for a new scene. From the case, she drew a slim file neatly secured in a black folder. Her fingertips traced the edge of the first page before pausing on one sheet. Heavy white stock bearing a bold red seal. She set it on the counter and slid it toward Rourke. He glanced down, still wearing the confident look of a man used to handling complaints or reimbursement claims. But the moment the first few words came into focus, that expression began to shift. Grand Hospitality Group. Beneath it, the heading, Notice of Share Transfer, Sterling Crown Hotel. Rourke's brow creased. He leaned in to read more, and then the third line landed like a hammer. 72% ownership signed this morning. The atmosphere shifted instantly. The noise drained from the lobby, leaving only the faint whir of phone cameras adjusting focus. Claudia, behind the desk, craned to see but caught only the red seal and the signature at the bottom. A whisper broke the silence. Wait. Grant Hospitality Group. Isn't that... But the voice trailed off, the speaker not entirely trusting their own eyes. Rourke looked up, his lips pressed thin. And what exactly do you plan to do with this? His tone no longer carried its earlier certainty. Malia held his gaze for a breath before answering, only to confirm that, as of this morning, I am the controlling shareholder of Sterling Crown. The room erupted again, but this time in disbelief rather than derision. Questions popped like firecrackers. What did she say? No way. That can't be real. Lena Cho tightened her grip on her phone, locking the lens on Malia. Her livestream surged in viewers, the comments exploding. Plot twist. He's finished. She owns the place. Rourke, despite trying to maintain composure, couldn't mask the truth. Control of the room had slipped from his hands. And if he thought this was the only blow, he was wrong. What Malia was about to reveal would hit far harder. Silence swept back in, deep enough for the hum of the AC to register as the only background sound. Malia didn't speak. She didn't need to. The red sealed document did the talking. the chandelier's light glinting off its glassy cover as if to underline its authority. Across the room, Lena broke the quiet, her voice sharp with excitement. "She owns the hotel!" It was enough to make heads swivel between Lena and Malaya, seeking visual confirmation. But Malia's face offered no denial, and just the same unnerving calm. The livestream detonated. Twist of the year. He's done for. No way that's fake. Some doubted, suggesting forged paperwork, but Rourke's ashen expression convinced most otherwise. Claudia, momentarily off balance, stepped forward as if to inspect the document, then stopped, wary of the cameras. Her lips tightened, her eyes darted to Rourke, but he didn't look back. Rourke held the paper longer than necessary, as though hoping the text might change. But the seal was there. The signature was there. The date was unshakably today. In less than a minute, the narrative had flipped from protecting standards to publicly humiliating Sterling Crown's leadership. The man used to dictating the rules now stood in the role of the defeated. Malia tilted her head, scanning the faces around her. She wasn't seeking applause or apology. She let silence work for her. Silence that forced people to fill it with their own questions. And the biggest question now wasn't, does she have the right to be here, but what will she do with that power? They wouldn't have to wait long to find out. Malia left the share transfer document where it was, then opened her case again. The hinge squeaked softly, drawing an unconscious hush from the crowd. This time she withdrew a thicker file, tabs marked in different colors. She flipped to the first section and set it beside the ownership papers. "Perhaps," she said evenly, "it's time we looked at some long-standing stains." The top sheet bore the bold title, Complaint, Racial Discrimination, Year 3 of General Manager Philip Rourke's tenure. Beneath it, witness statements, a case summary, and a final line. Settled internally, not disclosed. I scanned it quickly. Murmurs rose, tinged now with shock. Next came another. Lawsuit, gender discrimination. Front desk manager Claudia Benson. Same quiet note at the end. Resolved internally. Claudia's face was stone. Her knuckles whitened against the counter. All her earlier talk of standards now rang hollow. Rourke stood frozen, unwilling to touch the file. His eyes, once commanding, now looked like a man hunting for an exit. Lena's camera swept over every face, feeding a live stream that was erupting. She's got receipts. Not just a twist, a knockout. Claudia's done. These cases, Malia continued in that same steady voice, were always traceable. But when a system investigates itself, it always finds a way to close the file quietly. Her words cut beyond Rourke and Claudia, seeping into the minds of everyone watching, in the lobby and online, leaving a cold realization. What they saw today had likely happened before, just without witnesses or questions. Malia closed her case slowly, her gaze sweeping the room. "Today," she said, "we won't close the file." Neither Rourke nor Claudia moved. Everyone understood. Their silence was no longer a show of strength. It was the pause before the wave hit. The heavy wooden door shut behind her, sealing off the noise from the lobby below. The top-floor boardroom of Sterling Crown stretched wide and bright, its glass wall framing the city's skyline. At the center sat a long walnut table, its polished surface reflecting the recessed lights like a muted mirror. Malia took the chair at the head, once occupied by someone else, but as of this morning, the seat of power had changed hands. Around the table, the board members, faces accustomed to ruling from a distance, far from minor incidents, were now all present and visibly uneasy. On the large screen at the front, the company's stock chart was clear. The blue line had slashed downward nearly 5% in hours. Below it, transaction volume spikes flashed red, alongside the first hints of financial news headlines. "We're losing market value by the minute," one member said, voice taut. "If this spreads, it's not just press fallout. Major shareholders will be calling." Another member, eyes fixed on his report, added, "Litigation risk. Significant. Not just from the individual involved, but from civil rights organizations. And if similar past cases surface..." He left the sentence unfinished, but everyone caught the implication. No one used the word standards, a mantra repeated in the lobby less than an hour ago. Here the language had shifted to losses, liabilities, exposure. Gone were glossy slogans, only cold calculations remained. Malia listened, occasionally glancing at the chart. She didn't rush to speak, letting each board member show just how worried they were. In the brief pauses, the clicks of pens and the shuffle of paper sounded sharper. An older man with neatly combed silver hair broke in. "We can't allow this company's image to be tied to a public incident of racial discrimination." He said incident as though it were a technical glitch in the HVAC system. Malia turned to him, her gaze calm but enough to make him falter. "This incident," she said evenly, "is public only because someone filmed it and streamed it live. What I want to know is, how many times before this was handled in silence?" No one answered. A few eyes dropped to the table's glossy surface. Beyond the windows, clouds drifted past, their shadows moving slowly across the boardroom floor. A sharp contrast to the speed at which events below were spinning out of control. And Malia knew that in minutes she would place something on the table they could not ignore. Not numbers, but a truth that would force a choice. She opened the file before her, pages neatly tabbed in bright colors. Lifting the cover, she revealed the bold heading, Hospitality First Protocol. "We'll start with the simplest principle," she said, voice steady but carrying enough weight to still the room. "Verify before excluding. No one is denied access to this property based solely on first impressions or personal judgment. Every case must be confirmed through a clear process. And that will become an unwritten law at all our hotels." Some members shifted in their seats. A middle-aged man in a striped blue tie raised his hand. "Sounds good, but implementation would require retraining the entire staff. I'm concerned," Malia cut in, polite but firm. "Correct. And that's the second part. Mandatory anti-bias training. Every employee from security to front desk to senior management will complete a certified program run by an independent civil rights organization. No completion, no continued employment." A woman to her left tilted her head. "That cost won't be small. We're talking hundreds of staff, dozens of properties. Not to mention operational disruption." Malia closed the file, resting her hand on it. "We're also talking about $40 million in stock value lost in hours. Not counting revenue if customers and partners pull contracts." She leaned forward, eyes sweeping the table. "Training costs a few $100,000. A discrimination lawsuit can drain millions, plus reputational damage. I want to know, what exactly are we saving, and what are we sacrificing?" Silence. The hum of the HVAC filled the space. Someone flipped a report searching for a number to stand on, but no one spoke. "You worry about costs," Malia continued. "I worry about whether this brand survives. If Sterling Crown becomes known as a place that protects prejudice over guests, then every standard you're proud of will be worthless." There was a shift in the air, small but she felt it. Fewer defensive looks, a few nods. "We'll implement in 3 months. Every month delayed multiplies financial and legal risk. If you want proof, I can show data from 13 competitors who've adopted similar programs, with revenue growth to match." A member began to speak, but Malia leaned back, leaving space, either agree or be ready to explain to the public why not. They were beginning to understand. This wasn't a proposal, it was a condition for survival. Malia didn't move the file aside, her hand stayed on it, as though guarding a card not yet played. The stillness in the room made every breath audible. "Now," she said, voice low but sharp, "we address personnel." No one asked who, they all knew. Philip Rourke, general manager of Sterling Crown, and Claudia Benson, head of front desk. A pause. Her gaze swept them all. "Their actions this morning created a public crisis, inflicted financial and reputational damage, and exposed us to serious liability. They will be terminated immediately, no severance, no benefits, no exceptions." A faint murmur came from the far end, but Malia pressed on. "We will not use shareholder money to reward violations of core values. If anyone here believes keeping them is better for the company, I invite you to explain that Publicly, tomorrow. An older member, a longtime ally of Rourke, coughed softly. Malia, I understand, but this could set a dangerous precedent. We've let people go before, but always with... That was when you paid to make things disappear quietly, Malia cut in, her tone still measured. This time, it can't be buried. It's on tens of thousands of devices in hundreds of cities. Any sign of leniency will be seen as proof we protect offenders, not victims. Another pause. This time, not everyone avoided her eyes. Some looked down at their papers, others exchanged quick nods. I put this to a vote, Malia said. All in favor of immediate termination without compensation, raise your hand. The first to rise was a young member who'd been silent until now. Then another. Then two more. The left side of the table went up quickly. The right followed, slower, but one by one, every hand rose. Malia counted. Unanimous. No applause. No congratulations. Just a decision hitting the table like a red seal that couldn't be removed. Outside, the clouds had thinned. But inside this room, Malia knew, the real storm hadn't yet begun. The elevator door slid open with a slow, deliberate sigh, and Rourke stepped out first. Shoulders rigid, as if clinging to the last fragile threads of authority. His deep navy suit, once a uniform of unshakable prestige, now hung on him like an oppressive weight, the fabric absorbing more shame than power. Behind him, Claudia Benson followed quickly, her porcelain pale face drained of its usual confidence, the sharp staccato of her heels now an anxious clatter rather than a commanding rhythm. Flanking them, two silent security guards walked with calculated precision, never touching them, yet enclosing them in an unmistakable corridor of consequence. As they made their way toward the grand, gleaming lobby, employees instinctively drew back, some lowering their eyes in discreet discomfort, others watching with unabashed intensity, committing every second of this reversal to memory. The lobby doors swung open, letting in a flood of brilliant daylight that bathed the marble floor in a harsh, revealing glow. This was the very place, mere hours earlier, where Rourke and Claudia had used their words, their stares, their tone to drive Malia out. The chandelier still shimmered in soft gold. The reception desk stood immaculate, but the atmosphere was irrevocably altered. It carried the electric, almost tangible scent of poetic justice. Lena Cho, phone still streaming live, panned her camera with near-instinctive sharpness, capturing every step, every flicker of expression. The viewer count surged wildly, 80,000, 95,000, then bursting past 100,000 in under a breath. Comments poured in like a digital roar. This is the definition of karma. Zoom in on their faces. Best plot twist of the year. Rourke's gaze locked forward, jaw tight, but the faint twitch at the corner of his mouth betrayed the sting of so many lenses aimed squarely at him. Claudia tilted her head down, a curtain of glossy blonde hair cascading forward to shield her face. Yet it could not conceal the flush of humiliation climbing her neck. No one spoke. Yet the silence felt deafening, heavier than any sneer or insult could have been. Each heel strike on the marble echoed like an inverted memory of that morning. Only now, the roles of observer and observed had flipped entirely. Malia was nowhere in sight, and that absence made the moment infinitely sharper. This was a send-off without a host, a final act where the protagonists had been written out of their own ending. A young employee near the doors would later describe it as watching the curtain fall in a classic tragedy. The proudest characters forced to exit without applause. They didn't bow. They only walked faster, as if distance could undo the spectacle already burned into hundreds of thousands of screens. The revolving glass doors closed behind them with a muted thunk. Outside, the murmur of the city mixed with the faint whir of phone cameras that lingered even after their figures disappeared. Inside the livestream, the tide of comments shifted. I need to know what Malia does next. And that unspoken yet urgent was exactly what every pair of eyes in the lobby and across the world was waiting for. The doors slowly spun shut again, sealing out the street noise. From a quiet side hallway, Malia emerged, not rushing, not basking in triumph, but moving with a calm, deliberate gravity. She walked to the reception desk, the very spot Claudia had claimed that morning, and turned to face the lobby. Before her was a sea of phones, flashes, and now several professional cameras hastily assembled on tripods. Lena's livestream was still climbing, the comments scrolling in a frantic cascade. Malia spoke without a single note in hand, her voice clear, resonant, and effortlessly commanding. I'll keep this short. Sterling Crown will work directly with leading civil rights organizations to design a mandatory anti-bias training program for every single employee, from reception to the boardroom. Complete the training or you do not work here. A ripple ran through the crowd. Surprise, curiosity, and a grudging respect. A journalist in the front began to raise his hand, but Malia gave the faintest shake of her head, her composure so absolute it felt like a wall. Our new standard, she continued, starts with people. No more so-called standards used as excuses to exclude someone. We will build a standard of respect. Somewhere a low chuckle. Not mocking, but acknowledging the irony. A voice on Lena's stream added its own commentary. Funny how the place that prided itself on standards will now have to relearn them from scratch. Malia's eyes swept the room. Every hotel in our chain will have a dedicated hotline for guests to report discrimination directly to the board. No more internal resolutions that make problems disappear. Transparency will be our only insurance. The cameras followed her every measured gesture, each word driven not by theatrics but by an unshakable certainty. From the back of the lobby, a young woman, still in uniform but with her name tag removed, Hannah called out, "And those who've been treated unfairly before? Will they get a second chance?" Malia met her gaze. "Yes, no one will be shut out simply because they were once wronged. We are rewriting the rules for guests. And for the people who work here." The live stream chat shifted in tone. "If they pull this off, it's a turning point. At least they're not pretending it didn't happen. From today forward," Malia said, her voice steady and low, "no one at Sterling Crown will be judged by appearance before being welcomed as a human being." It was a promise and a dare. When the questions died down, Malia glanced toward the doors and motioned subtly. Two security guards, Silas and Jerome, approached, their posture stripped of morning bravado, their uniforms immaculate but their eyes unsettled. "This is Silas and Jerome," she announced. "They were present when it happened. They will remain employed provided they complete their anti-bias training within 30 days, the lobby murmured. This was not the fate of Rourke and Claudia. Whispers darted between clusters. "She's keeping them?" "Guess because they just followed orders." Malia's tone deepened. "I believe in accountability, but I also believe in the chance to make it right. They didn't make the rules, but they enforced them without questioning. Now they will learn to question and to act rightly, even when told otherwise." Lena pivoted the camera toward them, the viewer count holding above 6 figures. Silas stepped forward, voice rough but firm. "This morning I was wrong. I let a uniform and orders replace my own judgment. I'm sorry for contributing to the discrimination I should have stopped." Jerome followed, his breath shaky but his eyes steady. "I thought I was just doing my job, but a job is never a reason to harm the innocent. I can't undo it, but I'll prove change through my actions." The sincerity in their voices filled the lobby. No scripts, no rehearsals, just unpolished truth. Malia nodded. "They'll return after training, and they will stand here again, in this lobby, to share what they've learned. Everyone makes mistakes. What matters is what we choose to do next." Hearts flooded the live stream, the comments shifting toward hope. This is how you change culture, not just punish. Yet even in this moment of cautious optimism, one whisper lingered in the air. What will Malia do next? And that, more than anything, was the question on every mind, from the marble floors of Sterling Crown to the glowing screens around the world. 6 months had passed since that chaotic morning in the Sterling Crown lobby. The city had changed seasons, but the memory of that day still lingered. Not as a scandal, but as the spark that lit a genuine transformation. Outside the hotel, the boulevard trees had donned the fresh green of spring. Inside, the atmosphere was nothing like it had been half a year earlier. The front desk glowed under warm lights, Staff greeting guests not just with words, but with the kind of eye contact that told people they were truly welcome. No more measuring stares, no more guarded glances, just readiness to assist no matter who stood before them, what they wore, or where they came from. The first round of the Hospitality First Protocol training had been completed. These sessions weren't perfunctory PowerPoints in a dull conference room. They were immersive, scenario-driven exercises that forced employees to confront their own biases and learn to act with fairness. Every staff member, from security, reception, and housekeeping to management, now carried a signed certificate along with a pledge displayed in the staff lounge. Verify before excluding, respect before reacting. The results showed quickly. Quarterly reports revealed an 18% increase in revenue compared to the same period last year. Guest return rates climbed, especially among those who had once avoided Sterling Crown for fear of discriminatory treatment. Major event organizers, once hesitant, were now signing long-term contracts, citing the hotel as a symbol of equal service. The media tone had shifted too. 6 months ago, Sterling Crown's name made front-page headlines alongside words like scandal and discrimination. Now, the headlines read, "Reform model for the hospitality industry," and "From crisis to a new standard." A leading trade magazine even called it the case study of the decade. Malia wasn't stationed in the lobby every day, but her influence was everywhere. In new protocols, in the way staff introduced themselves, in the eyes of Silas and Jerome, now lead trainers for onboarding new hires. They told their own story as a reminder that mistakes don't define you. How you correct them does. But recovery wasn't only in the numbers or the press. It was in the small, unrecorded moments. A young staff member guiding an elderly guest to breakfast without being asked. A family entering the lobby smiling, knowing they wouldn't have to explain why they belonged there. Sterling Crown was no longer just a hotel. It was living proof that change was possible if someone dared to rewrite the rules. And Malia knew. This new standard was only as strong as the will to protect it. That afternoon, Malia left her office to visit the lobby. She rarely came during peak check-in, but today was different. A group of elementary school children was touring the city, their wide eyes drinking in the chandeliers as if they had stepped into a palace. One little black girl, maybe 8 years old, broke away from the group and walked toward Malia. Her floral dress was simple, her sneakers scuffed at the toes, and a purple backpack hung from her shoulders, decorated with cartoon stickers. She studied Malia for a long moment before asking, barely above a whisper, "Am I welcome here?" The question struck deeper than Malia expected. For a second she saw herself at that age, standing before a grand building and wondering if she'd be turned away just for not looking like the people who walked out of it. Malia crouched to meet her eyes. "You belong anywhere your dreams take you," she said warmly, firmly. "And when you walk into a place, you don't need permission to be yourself." The girl's eyes lit up. A small, hesitant smile formed. Malia offered her hand. The girl placed hers in it. A grip stronger than words. The moment might have remained private, but a nearby tourist caught it on video. Within hours, the image of Malia kneeling beside the girl, speaking those words, spread across social media with captions like, "This is how you rebuild trust," and "One sentence can change a world." The press called it the Sterling Crown moment, proof that a hotel once branded as discriminatory could show the world a different face. For Malia, it wasn't publicity. It was evidence that change wasn't just in policy or training manuals. It lived in conversations, in eye contact, in every response. The next day, when a new hire at the front desk was asked about their welcome policy, they replied, "We belong here, and so do our guests." When Malia heard about it, she simply smiled. Still, she knew words, no matter how beautiful, meant nothing without a system to uphold them. And deep down, she was already preparing the next move, one no one else could see coming. That evening, the city glowed with warm street lamps and the cold white lights of glass towers. In her high-floor office, Malia stood at the window, watching life flow below. 6 months ago, this had been the eye of a storm, and she, its silent center, ready to strike when the moment came. On her desk lay fresh files from legal, job applications from people who had left hospitality because of discrimination, and reports from other hotels in the chain showing early success with the Hospitality First protocol. She opened a thick envelope. Inside was a handwritten letter from an elderly couple. "Thank you for making Sterling Crown a place where we felt safe celebrating our 50th anniversary. We used to avoid hotels like this. Not anymore." Her smile wasn't one of triumph. Well, it was a reminder that the work wasn't done. She thought again of the little girl's question. "Am I welcome here?" And her own answer. She believed it, but belief would mean nothing if the Sterling Crown ever forgot. She reached for her leather briefcase, slipped in a slim folder marked "Only. Next phase." No one but her knew what it contained, but anyone who had witnessed that defining morning would recognize the signal. Malaya was preparing another move. Her phone buzzed with a text from a partner. "Ready for next week?" She didn't reply. Below it was the latest news alert. Another major city hotel accused of discrimination, the video going viral. She looked back out at the stream of headlights below. A decision formed, sharp and certain as the day she first laid her briefcase on the Sterling Crown front desk. In her mind, a voice spoke. Not to comfort, but to remind. Silence can be power, yeah, but sometimes real power is breaking it. Down below, the city kept moving. Above, Malia shut her office window, switched off the lights, and stepped into the hallway. Her next destination, no one knew. But for those who understood the story, there was an undeniable feeling. Somewhere, a clock had just started ticking. If this story touched your heart, make sure to like, share, and subscribe. Every click helps us bring more powerful stories of empathy, justice, and silent strength to life. Your support is what fuels this journey. Let's keep standing together and rising higher, one story at a time. Stay safe and inspired.